long, long ago, in a galaxy far, far away, on a gigantic Earth-like planet called Spheris Magna, there were a bunch of nerd kings called the Great Beings. They loved to create and do their science, and despite almost getting eaten by a glowing ball of tentacles, they pressed on, making a big giant robot that explodes because they didn't have the right sauce. But wait, newsflash, the right sauce called energized protodermis starts spewing out from the core of the planet, causing the normal jockeys to fight each other in a war for this radioactive goo. After the nerd kings try so many different ways to calm them down and make a bunch of different killer robot Terminators, they eventually decided, you know what, let's make a giant robot and just let that robot figure out what peace is and just have it come back after 100,000 years. Because clearly, after the killer Terminators, they had no clue what they were doing. So, they build this giant robot again, but this time with the right sauce and a whole ecosystem inside of it with little robots inside. So, they called the giant robot Amaja-Nui, and after one of their kind got tired of the nonsense and decided to jump inside of the ecosystem as a little robot, the robot was all the way off to explore space, learning from all kinds of different aliens about the meaning of peace while the planet broke into 3 different pieces. Meanwhile, the little robots thrived in this new ecosystem, so the giant robot began creating some various types of little robots, including some moderators called Makuta. After that, he didn't want to pay attention to them anymore, just kind of let them do whatever they wanted. So all the little robots began learning things about culture, art, emotions, feelings, crafting, and most importantly, war. So suddenly a bunch of military generals called the Baraki started roaming around and took over just about everything until the mods stepped in and banned them. But of course the mods got greedy and thought, you know, taking all this stuff sounds like a good idea. So after cleaning up another war in the giant robot's brain and finding out more information through a talking ugly squid, they finally had the idea to take over the whole ecosystem, led by a Makuta baddie named Teridax. That Teridax dude slowly made plans to take over the ecosystem. Very slowly, actually. A bunch of stuff happens in between that we don't really have to go over, but after a lot of pondering and thinking, he was like, finally, I know what to do. I'll make a plant. So he makes a plant to terrorize the little robots called Matoran in the giant robot's brain. He also targeted these heroes called the Toa, who protected the giant robot's brain, and basically fried their brains. But wait, it looks like he didn't kill all the Toa, because 6 new heroes appeared out of nowhere. Angry, he sent his minions to capture the Toa, though they failed, while trying to gather the Matoran in portal beds to wipe their memories. Then he bragged to the Toa, telling them it's too late, and gave the giant robot an aneurysm, sending him crashing into one of the 3 planetary pieces, which happened to be a giant ocean. The Toa defeated Teridax by trapping him in glue, and then go to find a new home outside the crashed giant robot while leaving the Matoran behind. When they come back, oh snap, spiders! Spiders everywhere! Then they get turned into werewolves, and then they go to find a one-eyed guy who can cure their sickness and get back to being handsome. One of the Toa decides to simp over reptilian waifu and helps her to command the spiders, but it doesn't last that long. Big battle happens between all the werewolves and the spiders, and the Toa were then tricked to free Teridax, who is still stuck in the glue, but they eventually turn back to their normal selves. After taking the sleeping Matoran to the new home outside of the giant robot, they woke up the little robots and turned into old dudes called Turaga. They lived happily ever after, until Teridax came along and started harassing them with animals. The old dudes prayed for some new Toa to come around, and they did, in pieces. These new Toa started obeying what the old dudes had to say by collecting masks and abusing the animals before fighting the big baddie Teridax in his lair. They win, but not just yet. Some roly-polies that were supposed to clean up the new place called Borak started showing up. The Toa had to go collect their brains before they fought against their queens who were walking dinosaurs. The Toa win again and get new masked armor and weapons because they were dipped in the right sauce. But wait, another set of roly-polies appeared, this time in silver, and they stole all of the Toa's powers. But then the Toa eventually got them back. The Toa have finally won, until some slug boys started appearing, who happen to be Teridax's sons. Is Teridax a mom? And then they start causing a lot of problems. One of the Matoran then goes on a quest to find a special Toa who is a light bulb. Turns out that same Matora is that Toa and transforms into one after his friend dies. He goes off, fights Teridax, takes a bath in the right sauce, and wins, I think. After the old dudes go on a history lesson about how they're cool with Toa and all, everyone in the new place decides to head back into the giant robot brain because they haven't really seen it for a while. They get there and later find out that the giant robot is dying and he needs a defibrillator, which happens to be a mask called the Mask of Life. So they send the Toa to find this mask, but later a bunch of Matoran decides to go because the Toa were taking too long. Back at the new place that was abandoned, a bunch of gangsters decide to loot the place and they find out about the mask and decide to go after it too. Those gangsters then go to another place that also happens to be outside of the giant robot. The Toa then get there and get their asses handed to them. Meanwhile, a bunch of Matoran get zapped by lightning and become Toa because why not? They head to this other place, beat the gangsters in a race towards the mask and get the mask, only to have the mask wanting to go for a swim. So the mask dives into the ocean, decides to meet up with one of those long-lost Baraki who happen to be now Angry Sushi. The Toa then jump into the water, get scuba gear, and then fight the Angry Sushi until they get the mask again, but oh no, the giant robot dies. So one of the Toa quickly uses the mask and turns into a pile of dust to save the giant robot. Hooray, the Toa have won, for the most part. Now their next step was to wake up the giant robot who has been sleeping for too long. Remember those Toa that got their asses handed to them? Well, they did a bunch of chores earlier and now they got new armor and are flying around the giant heart of the robot. Teridax is not happy, so he sends a bunch of his minions after them. They fight in the heart and get the mask to activate the heart. Oh no, a storm! But the Toa escape and go to the brain to celebrate. This is finally their victory. The Toa won. But uh-oh, they were wrong! Teridax is now in control of the giant robot. Now, turning the place into 1984, he decides to put Amaja-Nui into the defibrillator mask and kick him out into space. He happens to land into one of the 3 planetary pieces, this time a desert, and learns to become a Toa himself. After meeting with the jockeys and beating a bigger jockey who was just plain stupid, he teams up with all the jockeys to rebuild that giant robot that blew up so many centuries ago. Teridax is not happy. He flies over to the desert piece and decides to do a wrestling match with Amaja-Nui, who is now in his own giant robot. The two fight, and one of the Toa decides to flash himself to distract Teridax into smacking his head into a planetary piece. Teridax gets a fatal head concussion and collapses onto the ground. The planet is finally whole again. Yay, the Toa have won! But wait, remember that one nerd king that jumped into the ecosystem? Well, he's back, and he wants to rule not just the ecosystem, but the whole planet, because the other nerd kings were slow and cowardly. Not like he wasn't slow and cowardly either, though. Some Toa were sent to find these nerd kings to let them know of their successes, with a scary killer robot specifically targeted towards them. Some other Toa got stuck in rehabilitation hell, while that one nerd king was going around on a murdering spree, even killing the talking ugly squid we were talking about earlier. Will the Toa finally win? We will never know. They stopped making them. This is Bionicle.